we're going to be talking about the sock puppet dance of toxic positivity, danced by neo-vegans to the tune of their neoliberal masters. What on earth does that mean? It's why there's a lot of anger between different groups of vegans and a lot of backbiting and smearing and slapping around the vegan face, even though we should all be on the same side. And it all started with a voice message.
Hi, I started watching the video and I didn't think it was very constructive of him to put down certain various ways of doing animal activism. I thought every area of activism has a place and a positive place, and I found it quite negative, so I didn't continue watching the video. So my point being is, good luck, well done everybody for doing everything that you're doing, and I think it's amazing. Positive attitude is always the best way forward. Thank you, bye.
Such a perfect example of toxic positivity by a vegan against another vegan, Jake Conroy, who dared to put up a video critiquing Anonymous for the Voiceless. Not in a sort of a backbitey kind of way, but in a sort of like a data and having done researchy kind of way. Bad vegan here shared it, and of course it all kicked off. Now I must be a thick vegan as well, because I honestly, when I do this, I'm not trying to sort of like annoy people. They might be interested in an alternative point of view. That voice message, I thought, well, what's going on there? Because these are sincere people, you know, they're vegans like me. And there's a definite sort of schism, a rift between the two groups of vegans. The vegans that will sort of like ask questions, and the vegans that think that asking questions is like the worst thing in the world that you can do. That is what toxic positivity is all about. It's about shutting down the discussion under the guise of don't be divisive, you're being negative, you're just a hater, jealous, you wish you could earn X amount of pounds, shillings, pence, dollars. Toxic positivity is not something that belongs only to the vegan culture. It's part of the neoliberal culture. We're getting more into that in a minute. But let's go back to the voicemail message, because the voicemail message used some classic tropes of toxic positivity. The person accused Jake Conroy of not being constructive and of putting down certain groups. That certain groups thing is kind of quite a curious way of talking about basically cubes and saves, which he didn't put down, it was a critique. And he was very measured about it and very data driven. He'd done a lot of research. That video, for those of you that haven't seen it, was about Conroy sharing his thoughts and research that he'd done around the whole discussion about Anonymous for the Voiceless, and the fact that they had been funded to the tune of about $1.5 billion. And the venture capitalist who'd funded them had recently withdrawn the funding due to lack of transparency and apparently being very off message about Black Lives Matter. In the voicemail, it was put like this: every area of activism has a place and a positive place. And I thought this was like curiously the rhythm of Donald Trump has a place and a positive place. And I found it quite negative, so I didn't continue watching the video, says the person, with its implied punishment to both the sharer and the maker of the video. It's like you have been bad. You were going to be shut down, which is funny in one way and absolutely tragic in another way, because this whole activism thing is partly about the physical activism and partly about the mental, intellectual thinking kind of activism. And that means critical thinking. It doesn't mean accepting the status quo, because obviously if you're a vegan, you've challenged the status quo at some point, said, oh no, actually, you know, using other animals is not my thing and I'm going to stop doing it. So you've challenged the status quo, you've challenged the dominant culture there. The other thing about this voice message that I found really extraordinary was the way it ended. It ended with an actual rallying cry. Well done everyone! A positive attitude is always the best way forward. What you're doing is amazing. So very conscious there of the audience and transmitting an extremely quote unquote positive, we're all supporting each other, we're all amazing, we're all incredible, you know, tra-la-la sort of message. How did that vegan activist and so many others like them get brainwashed by the neoliberal propaganda machine that we all live in, the dominant culture, to actually think like this. They're speaking against the systemic change that is the only way that we're going to get animal liberation and end the war on animals, is a systemic change. It's not going to be a baby step change. It's like not a little bit of tinkering around the edges. Changing the dominant cultural notion that it's all right to use our fellow beings. That's not going to happen without asking a few questions, is it? The problem is, vegans have been brought up in the dominant culture, which really values this sort of like happy, clappy, positive, feel-good, neoliberal schlock as a substitute for critical thinking, analysis, and any real sense of humility and the desire to learn. Why is toxic positivity a problem? When you don't use critical thinking and ask questions, you end up doing performative franchise activism globally and thinking you're really making a difference in the war on animals, when actually it's more like a sort of like an astroturfing operation, in which, although I have to say the vegans that do this are probably not aware that it's astroturfing. So astroturfing is when a corporate entity is trying to sort of big up its sort of like positive image of like how green they are, or caring they are, how great they are, and they start like a mock grassroots group, and that's where the word astroturfing comes from, because it's like it's not grassroots, it's astroturfing. So the corporate starts this astroturfy group, which is then populated by sock puppets. Again, it's an actual term used by progressives. And the sock puppets perform grassrootsiness to the benefit of the corporate, because nobody knows that they are part of the corporate operation. This is my concern about the saves and the cubes and the vegans that are taking part in these operations. Not that this is necessarily actually the way it's happening, but it's performing exactly an identical function to sock puppetry and astroturfing. And who does it benefit? The vegans would say, oh yeah, well, it benefits the animals, because every conversation we have, every social media post we do, people are raising awareness and it's all great. I would say that by not critiquing, by shutting down any sort of like questioning, is giving the impression that there is vegan activism against the war against other animals, whereas actually it's very, very low-key and it's super corporate friendly, promoting the consumer way of doing things, corporate consumer citizen, the citizen as consumer. It's hardly surprising, is it, that you've got venture capitalists supporting to the tune of millions. I think the saves I heard recently got, $10 million, and the AVs got $1.6 million. So corporate people are not idiots, whatever else they may be, and they've sort of figured out, well, yeah, this is legit, but it's legit for them, the corporates, but is it legit for the animals? The same people that believe in toxic positivity are also fans of the white male saviour syndrome, and that again is buying into the neoliberal culture, isn't it, of like, yeah, we can save the world, yeah, especially for a white male, and we're a celebrity. And it doesn't matter, we're making like hundreds of thousands of pounds, and that's all really great. And that's what they say. If you try and critique the white male entrepreneur activist who's a celeb, you're just jealous. You're publicity hungry, being negative. What is worse than being negative? It's the worst thing. I want to quote from called Writing Liberation. They say, in its structure, the mainstream animal rights movement is beginning to resemble a multi-level marketing scheme, not just financially, but in the cultural enforcement of toxic positivity and silence. And that's the key ingredient, silence. Everything is okay, don't worry about it, don't criticise, you're just a hater. How is establishing the corporate structures of hierarchy, elitism, the maldistribution of funds, and the exploitation of labour, volunteers, to create brand power conducive to the realisation of liberation? Answer, it's not. As Roger Yates of the Vegan Information Project states, it's counter-revolutionary. And I think that's key, it's counter-revolutionary. It succeeds in elevating a few at the expense of many, upholding the very same systems of oppression upon which the exploitation of other animals is dependent. Capitalism diminishes the liberatory capacity of veganism and animal rights. I would say it was neoliberalism rather than capitalism, because neoliberalism is the ideology of the market. The market can solve everything. The corporates are always fantastic. If they're not fantastic, they're so powerful, they can always come up with a better idea than anybody else. That's the whole consumer vegan thing. Yeah, the corporates will put out a few, veggie burgers and, job done, animals saved. Capitalism is about buying and selling things and making a profit. And that's different. The ideology is neoliberalism. And that's also about the other facet of that is like the individual is king or queen. We're also great because we're individuals. We're also radically different. And if somebody climbs to the top of the celebrity berry tree and earns loads of money, they should be followed because they're shiny and special and amazing, unlike the rest of us, mugginses, sort of like traipsing around in the sludge of daily life. So what's the solution to this toxic positivity? As vegans, we need to educate ourselves about other struggles and other movements, because otherwise, how on earth are we going to know what a natural struggle and a movement looks like? I didn't really know until I started to educate myself. How do we do this? By talking to people and reading books and maybe watching really nice videos by people like Chris Hedges on RT, and he does On Contact, and he's a journalist, an investigative journalist who won a Pulitzer Prize, and he's always talking about neoliberalism and deconstructing it in a very accessible way. So we need to recognise that the neoliberal ideology is aimed at keeping us all as passive consumers, supporting this consumer-driven destruction of the planet and everything on it. That is the benefit of toxic positivity. It shuts down any sort of discussion about the wider implications of what's going on. And it's an ideology of compliance. It's like corporate mummy and daddy know best. Don't be disobedient, because otherwise you're spoiling it for everyone. Don't be negative. And if you ask questions, you're being disloyal. Disloyal to your corporate overlords, perhaps, but not to the animals who are suffering and being tortured to death and being used trillions every single year. That's where my loyalty is, not to brands. The thing about toxic positivity that is great from the corporate point of view is that because it shuts people up, nobody's going to question the role of the corporate. Because it's our culture, we can't actually see it unless we analyse it and check out the likes of Roger Yates, Chris Hedges, or read books by people like Professor Steve Best and David Nibert and Tom Regan. All these will be down in the links below. Citizen consumers, vegans have internalised these messages, which is really awful but not surprising. But what is the more awful and more surprising is that they don't want to challenge them. They don't want to investigate them. Would they want to join a book club where these kind of books and these kind of topics were discussed? Would you want to join a book club where these kind of topics and authors were discussed? To be serious and effective activists rather than basically, unfortunately sock puppet hobbyists. We need to think, we need to analyse, we need to learn. We need to discuss, we need to question. We need to criticise, not for the sake of criticising. If you see something that is clearly not working, or you think you've got a better idea, well, isn't that how anything works? Because if we don't do this, we're just indulging in astroturfing in the war against other animals. It's up to each and every one of us to organise, to think, and to make a difference, to end the war on animals. And unlike veganism, which is a philosophy, this is a personal choice to make these decisions about how we're going to run ourselves and our activism. So thank you if you've got this far. Together, we can educate ourselves to stop the war on other animals. This is Pamela from Animal Justice Emergency. Please feel free to like and share if you liked and want to share.